at 10.
Nationwide, people are having a harder time making ends meet. Record foreclosures, lost jobs, and rising prices have many San Diego families fearing they may lose everything.
Tonight, KUSI's Ed Lenderman examines the crisis in a special report, American Dream, Economic Nightmare. Ed?
Last week, KUSI's John Soderman brought us a wrenching story, a story all too common in San Diego County these days, a homeowner in trouble.
I'm really worried. I'm feeling extremely trapped. I'm in negative equity 90%. I have not found rewards in home ownership.
It was on the day the latest foreclosure and delinquency notice figures came out. The news was bleak, and real estate analysts and economists say to expect more of the same, likely for the rest of the year. A few days later, we went back and visited with the woman John Soderman spoke with. We'll call her Ann. She asked us not to use her real name. Ann says this is it. By the end of the year, she'll probably have to walk away from the very first house she called home.
Every month, I'm not paying on a second loan and a third loan, and the interest is continuing to accumulate.
Much of the story of the home mortgage crisis involves so-called subprime loans. In a word, predatory. You've heard all about it, but Ann didn't get a subprime loan, and she's still facing foreclosure.
I'm bound to the terms of this particular paperwork.
Believe it or not, Ann has a fixed interest rate. She was wisely wary of an adjustable. The problem is her mortgage involves 3 loans. But even with a second job, she can only afford to pay the primary. Like many first-time buyers, she was desperate to get into a home as housing prices were rising. Now she's beating herself up for not truly understanding her loan package.
There's an element of deception, I think, because the way the loans were couched as non-existing, the second and third I'm speaking of. But I also take responsibility in terms of not being fully aware of every single aspect of that loan.
Ann says the emotional and physical toll of her situation is overwhelming. Dominoes are falling.
That in turn leads to other problems. Real estate agents aren't selling, lenders aren't lending, so mortgage brokers are hurting.
Carl Sterrett is a business and consumer attorney. One of his specialties is bankruptcy. But that's a last resort, he says.
Because it will sit on your credit for 10 years, but there's certainly a number of options available to you, and you have to take a global look at the person's situation. A lot of people, I find, spend a lot more money than they think, and one of the first things you really need to get a hold of is your spending habits, budgeting, and there's many organizations that will do that for a fee, and nonprofit agencies.
Even bankruptcy, he says, won't solve all your debt problems.
Among other things, if you're spending $100 a week at Starbucks, that's not a good thing, and bankruptcy won't help fix your spending habits, except, of course, to the extent that your credit cards will no longer be available for luxury purchases.
Options. There are many, and we're going to explore them, including a nonprofit credit counseling agency in Part 2 of American Dream, Economic Nightmare. We want to thank Ann for sharing her story with us. Even though she represents thousands of local homeowners, it isn't easy discussing a painful financial situation on television. By the way, we are putting her in touch with attorney Carl Sterrett and the nonprofit credit counseling agency that we will profile in the second part of our report tomorrow night, Thursday, right here on the 10 o'clock news. Paul, Kelly?
All right, thank you, Ed. Now, people who are sitting out there facing very much the same thing that she is, tomorrow you're going to tell them at least where they can turn, where they can get suggestions. But the point that was made by that one fellow is that you got to learn where to cut costs.
Absolutely. A lot of this is going to be individual responsibility. Don't run from it, but face it, and we are going to provide some help for you.
And knowing the right place to get that help.
You bet.
That's super. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.